This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by MSA, the world's leading manufacturer of high-quality fire rescue and safety solutions, protecting first responders around the world since 1914. For more information, visit msafire.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzow. I'll be your host. I'm a writer here at Fire Rescue One. I'm a fire officer in Wisconsin, and I'm also super excited to talk about a topic that's kind of confusing. And our guest today is super smart. So he's bringing up the IQ of the program by 3 or 4-fold. Number one. But he's also got a great way to dummy it down to talk to a person like me. And I'm not going to say NFPA for dummies, but I just did. With us today is Jeff Stull. And before we start, Jeff, I just want to say thank you for 40 years of service, working with the fire service, trying to, and not trying, but actually making us safer, helping with our standards, and working on our health and wellness, all of that combined. So first and foremost, thanks for being one of those people that maybe we don't see you, but we know you're there and you're making an impact. And welcome to the program again.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity from Fire Rescue One to participate in this podcast, as well as all the other activities I work with you on. So,
well, you've been a columnist for Fire Rescue One. You're, in addition to that, you're the president of the International Personal Protection Incorporated, your own company. And
right.
Again, 40 years with that company.
Yes. Well, not 40 years. I had 5 years in the Coast Guard, then 5 years with a separate research institute called Texas Research Institute here in Austin, Texas, where I reside.
Okay. So that's how you that's kind of where you are now. But
right.
You also, in addition to that, you serve on a lot of NFPA committees on PPE internationally as well with protective clothing. I love the name of your book. This is why you and I are getting along so well, because your book, authored the book PPE Made Easy to read, not easy to write.
Right. No, it was painstaking to try to, it's taken a lot of material and just trying to get the essentials out of it. And most importantly, make it understandable. And not that that's so challenging. It's just that you have to really take a step back and not make assumptions about what people know. So it was a worthwhile effort, honestly. And that's the way I rather engage anyway, is I rather obviously speak to everyone's level of interest, and some people don't want to go as deep on everything. They don't need to. So obviously being able to do that in a book like that was helpful.
And you also do webinars. So you had one recently on Fire Rescue One, navigating the NFPA 1851, 1852, and then how that merged to 1850. And that's all part of a standard series that MSA, and thank you to MSA for sponsoring that series and putting together all these resources, which you can access at firerescue1.com/the standard series. This podcast is also going to be included in that, but MSA has really gone out of their way to really try to help the general firefighter understand, PPE, the NFPA, and all of the new kind of standards and interactions within the standards. And we'll talk a little bit about that. It's not a topic that, right, as a firefighter, if I want to fall asleep, I'm just going to ride.
I would not advise you to read an NFPA standard if you didn't have to. It's like, so just because it is not material for reading pleasure. Obviously, it's not even material that's easy to read the way the standards are written.
Yeah. How did you get involved with all this in the first place?
I was in the Coast Guard. I was an officer. I just came off a ship. I went to school, chemical engineering for them, because I was going to go into their hazardous materials program, where they regulate cargoes involving transportation of hazardous materials. But I took a turn when I went to the research and development. They had a specific need for a PPE program manager, because at the time they had stood up these relatively sophisticated response teams called the National Strike Force. And these would be regional teams that would go out and deal with oil spills, chemical spills. There was like the Argo Merchant, the big oil spill back in the 70s, and all these other things that start these capabilities. But on the chemical side, obviously they're dealing with all kinds of nasty things in huge quantities. So they needed the chemical protective clothing, the respirators, the monitors. So I got involved with that part of it. But back in 1984, there was an accident, specifically one that was investigated by the National Transportation Safety Board. So this was a hazmat team in Benicia, California, and essentially they had a rail car that started leaking. Liquid was coming out of it, so they got their encapsulated suits. They went downrange. They got on top of the tank car. They started using tools to try to mitigate the leak, and their visors of these encapsulated suits broke open, and they were exposed to this highly hazardous chemical. Fortunately, no fatalities there, but because the National Transportation Safety Board investigated this, they had a finding and said, these suits, there's no standards around them. There's nothing that says that, for example, in that case, the material used in the construction of the suit was okay, but the visor, plastic material in the face shield wasn't. It melted essentially when this chemical came in contact. So there was not even compatibility, but the manufacturer didn't do anything about that. And it was,
Right.
so it was
It
certainly
was
a
the
need for
weakest
standards.
link.
Yeah,
Right?
it was the weakest link. And we see that all the time in PPE, is that you focus on one part of it, but then something else is going to hurt you because you didn't take care of that. So there was a call for standards development, and called out the Coast Guard I was in, and the EPA and other organizations, and they said we need to have standards. And then I got linked up with the International Association of Firefighters, which was helping to write standards for the National Fire Protection Association. And it became the platform for doing the hazmat alongside structural firefighting. So when I got into that group, it just naturally spread between both hazmat and structural firefighting and EMS, tech rescue, and a whole host of other things. Wildland firefighting and all those other things came into being after that type of event. So there was a lot of standards activity back in the early 80s.
And now you're seeing with structural firefighting, all the chemical, right? Like, is it almost taking you back to the 80s?
This is the misnomer. After going through all this and thinking, okay, we got to use encapsulated suits. It used to be level A all the way, because everyone said, oh, you're going to be in, XYZ bad shit chemical, and you're going to have to, wear this encumbering outfit. That's not true, by the way, anymore, because they're more sophisticated techniques. But I will tell you that structural firefighting is more hazmat than hazmat.
Yes.
And
I agree.
because every incident, you're on a self-contained breathing apparatus. Every incident, if there's a structural fire, there's toxic chemicals that are at ideal age, immediately dangerous to life and health conditions that are, will poison you, skin absorption, inhalation, ingestion, however that may happen. And that's not always true for hazmat. Maybe the single commodity in the derailed tank car on a railway, or at a factory where someone opens the wrong valve, or whatever happens. Hazmat happens every day in every structural fire.
Yeah.
And that's just the truth of it.
And it brings forth, why are we not wearing our PPE, SCBA, every time we're even getting close to?
Well, and you're right. I mean, one of the things that, and it goes even further than that, cleaning, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, too. But you need to take, structural fires are one of the most dynamic, ultra hazardous events that a first responder can encounter. Obviously, there's any number of hazards. I mean, you get shooters now, you've got, biologicals, you've got all kinds of things going on in one of these events. Typically new building materials. It really is a difficult type of activity to consistently provide protection against. So when you write a standard, you say, do we protect against everything? I mean, like, if I wanted a car, let's say, and I was going to build the car, and I said, I don't want to be injured during an automobile accident. Oh, okay, I'll go out and find the best National Transportation Association rated vehicles, right? And maybe it's, vehicle XYZ, and I'll go get that. But if I wanted to go overboard, I have a tank, right? An Abrams A1 tank, and I would be driving that around. Well, hell, I can't. I mean, yeah, it's going to protect me, but it's not going to have good gas mileage. It's not, it's not going to fit in the garage. I mean, there's all kinds of things are going to not be viable. So you got to balance what these needs are, and that's been the challenge of PPE, and continues to be the challenge of PPE. Every time I think we're somewhere like mature in the development of this clothing equipment, it's something new happens. Whether it's lithium-ion battery fires or something, now is a newbie thing that we have to change. And this is the challenge that continues in this industry.
We talked a little bit about behind the scenes, and I think this is a really good point. Why is the NFPA so like? Why does it get so technical? And you said the story. You're like, well, when we sit down, we have manufacturers, we got all these people in the room, and we say, hey, we need to address this, uh, but you may not be as thorough. So the manufacturers will maybe not necessarily avoid it, but they kind of,
Well, there's a
hey,
lack of understanding. I mean, so
yeah,
so first standards in NFPA on turnout gear, actually before my time, which dates me a lot. But these standards were maybe like 15 pages long, right? I'll give you a classic example: thermal insulation. How keeping a firefighter from being burned. There was no such thing as a TPP test back when I started. They measured the thickness of the materials, and they had to be 0.175 inches thick to be a qualified set. Now the materials had to be flame resistant, heat resistant, but we didn't even have an insulation test. So
so it
obviously,
really couldn't
yeah,
tell exactly
yeah,
how
that's right,
much,
that's
right?
right. And you couldn't predict burn injury or anything. So we came up with a TPP test, a thermal protective performance test. So you write the method in there because that didn't exist. But going back to your question, really, what happens is that good intentioned, we write requirements. So we say we want gear to do X, Y, and Z. Firefighters have specific needs for protection against specific hazards, and we make attempts to do that. And then we learn, unfortunately, sometimes from field experience, that it doesn't work as well as we want. Or we write requirements that are interpreted differently, either how a test is done or how a design requirement for how something should be put together is specified. And there's a different interpretation. Whoa, we didn't really mean that. So, okay, we got to write more language in here, be more specific, create more details, caveats, all this other stuff that makes the standard clearer so that when someone picks up a set of gear and they have a label and it says meets NFPA 1971, which is now 1970, it means something, that there's a minimum level of protection that you're being provided as a firefighter. And it's harder to do when you think. And again, a 15-page standard to now almost a telephone book. Well, I don't want to use telephone books anymore, but you have
I should describe what a telephone book is for our young
yeah,
listeners. Is we
for your
used,
readers. Right.
yeah, you used to have to, before you could look up everything on this thing in your pocket, you would
Right.
have to, like, it used to
Right.
be about 500 pages, depending upon your city size, and
Yeah.
you'd actually look up
Well, it's not
everything.
quite 500 pages, but we're not far from that now. And it just shows you the level of detail, and it gets exacting. And again, we got new hazards. I mean, we didn't worry about things like oh gosh, like liquid chemicals, or biologicals. That was a new thing in the late 1980s, 1990s. Bloodborne pathogens. That
Yeah.
was, a new avenue for protection that had to be investigated because firefighters were the first responders, and what were they be wearing? Turnout gear for that protection. So things got added, and added, and we're going to hopefully get to this, but we're now reaching that state where, okay, we keep adding stuff gets more complicated, more pages. We got to take a step back and say, okay, what do we really need? What's changed? Because some of the things we know, hazmat, for example, we used to put everyone in an encapsulating suit,
Type A or Class A, right? Or
level A suit,
level, yep.
because encapsulates like, well, it's going to protect you. It's going to protect your respirator. You're not going to be able to do anything. You're going to get caught in a confined space. Certainly, if there's, you're trying to, navigate that. But we know now that with good tactics and being able to monitor the situation and apply learning that we've gained over years of extensive training, procedures, practices, we don't need an encapsulated suit for many instances. In fact, the same thing is true for structural. But again, structural is so unique in that it's dynamic. I mean, you think this is an ordinary fire, and then you turn the corner, or something happens on the outside of the fire ground that affects, like, ventilation or unexpected ventilation, or structural collapse, or any of these things happen. It really gets tough. So it becomes this game of trade-offs. What are the expectations? What's realistic? And how do we write that so that we have it, and have it available to everyone for their minimum level of protection? It does not obviate training. It does not obviate firefighter firefighters remaining astute on the ground, paying attention, following their training and also their intuition, unfortunately, as well, towards protecting themselves and keeping themselves safe.
Yeah, the environment is changing so quickly too,
It is.
which is why the standard has to change. And I know that's one of the challenges on being in these committees is, hey, what's coming next? Not only what are we seeing, but where are we going to go? What's coming next, and what do we have to prepare for in the future? And you had mentioned that we're trying to go it looks like the NFPA is kind of combining some of the standards.
Well, they are, and I'll be honest with you. I wasn't a fan of NFPA's consolidation because it's a lot of work to put standards together. In this case, for structural firefighting, they took the clothing standard, which includes in itself garments, the garments, pants and coat or coveralls with the hood, the helmet, the gloves, and the footwear. Those are all individual components. There's no singular standard that covers gloves that works well for garments, for example. There's differences in the way those things are put together and the expectations for those products. But then you put in SCBA, PASS, and work apparel into the same standard, and it starts to get, you're trying to get this homogeneous feel for it. And the way NFPA did it is they more or less took 4 different standards and just put them all together and made a common scope. And again, it was a big deal to do that. It wasn't simple because we had to create some uniformity among requirements and some other things. But what it has done as a positive, it's opened up the opportunity to look at the big picture as, okay, I'm protected by this entire ensemble. In the future, can you have SCBA combined with garments somehow? Maybe the straps are built into the coat. There's things you can do because your system, as you point out, the weakest link can be of an ensemble. Maybe it's the respirator face piece, right? The lens melts, and they fixed that years ago. Or maybe it's gloves shrink, in heat. We think gloves are great, but you can't put turnout clothing on your hands. You just can't. You wouldn't be able to function. So
they're already gloves are already hard enough to.
Yeah, they are. They are,
right?
and they're really they haven't gotten as better as we would hope they had. There hasn't been this magical material that showed up that says, okay, leather is still the best thing for gloves. If you go to textiles, you just can't get the same thickness as you can in a turnout coat, right? And that's the problem. That's the problem.
And recently, you did a webinar for us here on Fire Rescue One, just talking about the NFPA, the 1850,
right?
And we had mentioned and kind of briefly with it. But what's the biggest kind of change and challenge that we see from that standard now?
Well, the whole point in having 1850 come forward, obviously, it was a consolidation itself of 1851 and turnout clothing and 1852 SCBA.
Yeah.
And when that happened, again, SCBA had its own thing, turnout gear had its own thing. So there's some uniformity between the two. But the theme there really was we need to have our products cleaned more often. And that's been going on for a decade or two. It used to be Marlboro Man, and this was the image that was the accepted seasoned firefighter, and that was the cool way for a firefighter to appear. And that's obviously no longer acceptable. And we've gladly seen that disappear.
Yeah, no more pig pen.
Yeah, right. And we also recognize that gear, so you go into a fire, which is already hazardous enough, and you're exposed to all this stuff, and your gear is protecting you from being exposed to that stuff for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part. So now, but it's all loaded up on your gear. Now you come out, and if you're continuing to wear that gear, then you're going to be exposed, and that's secondary contamination. So maybe the next call is an EMS call, but you're still wearing dirty turnout clothing, or the next call is vehicle extrication. You have that gear on, and you're contaminating your apparatus. You go back to station, or personal vehicle for volunteer firefighter, wherever that might be. You're seeing all this, and that cleanliness is an issue. So where we were going in this last edition of 1851 was to try to make cleaning more accessible and understandable. So we learned that if you have to do things on your own, if you can't put it in a machine, press a button, say clean this, it's not going to happen as
No.
often and frequently as you'd like. So boots, helmets, gloves sometimes don't get washed really well. Even SCBA, are hard to wash. Nooks and crannies all over the place. So there's challenges. So one of the things we've tried to do with that is to get those practices in place in a way that's practical and can be implemented by the fire service.
Yeah. But I also know that there are companies now that are saying, hey, we're going to take that part of kind of the onus of that off of the organization also. And they stay up to the NFPA standard, right? And so
There's independent service providers, but the reality is this has got to be at the department level. That responsibility is at the department level. ISPs, independent service providers, are a tool.
Yes.
That a department can go reach out to, get qualified, verified. Actually, that's the other thing. There's verification of those organizations and their competence and capabilities to be able to do that correctly. So the department can lean on them, and departments themselves could go through that verification, but it's expensive. What we end up doing is we ensure that the commercial facilities that do that are verified, and we have many, many of those out there to support those activities in the fire service. But at the department level, the program's got to be in place. If it isn't, then cleaning's not going to happen. Proper selection, care, and maintenance isn't going to happen at all. So,
do you see? Is it frustrating when you go through and fight? I shouldn't say fight, but like push to get a standard, and then you see the fire service not necessarily embrace it? Are there things that you see that we should be doing to really help support your mission?
Well, yeah, so the fault goes both ways. We try to do things, and we have committees, that are balanced, that have manufacturers. We have obviously that make the products. We have people that are from the fire service end users or consumers. We have labor. We have research and testing organizations like Underwriters Laboratories, Safety Equipment Institute that certify this stuff. We have special experts, and those people come together and try to rate requirements. And I will tell you that we do the best that we can, but there's never enough fire service input. Never. And part of that is, frankly, it's expensive to participate in this process. They have to attend meetings. Even with virtual meetings, there's still a lot of time taken up. But if ordinary firefighter goes to this, they're going to get bored real quick because they're going to be arguing about some nut and bolt thing that they could care less about. But we have to have better outreach for the fire service to be engaged. And there's ways to do that. They don't have to go to an NFPA meeting. They could just go, we can make this outreach program so that we engage firefighters. And that's been done time and again. A specific topic. I'll go a classic one right now is helmets. What should helmets be? Do they need ear covers? Do we need face shields anymore? I mean, there's stuff like that you can argue all you want in a committee, and they've been arguing about that topic for 20 years. Is the time changing where we can get this consensus moving? We're actually seeing movement when we do these broad reach outs. So the standards themselves have to be written in a certain language. They're intended for the manufacturer.
Okay.
And that means that the manufacturer is given a set of specifications, instructions. Okay, you got to have these design features. We're not trying to tell them how to build it, but we're telling them that there's certain things they have to have on that gear. But more importantly, we're relying on performance. And the performance comes from testing the gear using specific methods. And those methods then yield results, and we write criteria. Now, it's tough enough coming up with a test method that's not only reliable and works but is meaningful, and more importantly, discriminates how the gear works in the field. Because I can write a test method to show you whatever you want, really.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't correlate,
if it's not applicable to what we do,
right?
Like,
that's a problem. That is a serious problem. And that does happen. We've made mistakes. We put a test out thinking, okay, it's going to solve that problem. So there's that. But going back, you asked a fundamental question: why is it, do we sometimes come up with something and then there's no traction in the marketplace? The fire service says, you know what, we can ignore this. In structural firefighting, fortunately, we have a lot of traction, and part of that is driven by litigation, but it's also driven by the fact that the standard has supported meaningful product development direction over the past couple of decades. We've seen improvements. We've seen reduction in burn injuries. We've seen being able to address heat stress a little bit better. We know that when it's implemented, it does work, and fire departments are inclined to follow the standards. Now, there's maybe more ways they can be efficient about that. In other words, okay, know the standard a little bit more so that when you specify your gear, you can customize it above those minimum requirements
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to meet whatever is important to you. And maybe you learn that from a neighboring fire department. Maybe you've learned that on your own, but you have that ability to do things, and you can only do that if you know the standard. And you have to know the standard because, as good intentions as many manufacturers are, they're going to be selling their product, and it may or may not be the right fit for you. So your education in the standard is helpful. Now, you don't need to know the nitty gritty about how each test works and so on, but you need to know what that result means and what that means relative to your level of protection.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, and if, again, this comes together from both the committee side and the end user side, that interaction makes for better standards. It just does. And standards would be more likely to be accepted if there's some essentially participation on the part of the fire service in forming those standards. It's just not some, lofty committee out there that's, sitting in, a closed room thinking of, how to make things more expensive for the fire service or anything like that. It really isn't that at all. We're really attempting to try to make this a better deal and really truly weighing those trade-offs between new requirements, old requirements, where those levels should be drawn, and so on.
MSA protects you from head to toe with their core fire service products, including the revolutionary MSA G1 SCBA XR Edition, FireGrid software, Lunar connected device, Cairns fire helmets, and Globe turnout gear and boots. Driven by its singular mission of safety, MSA Safety has been at the forefront of safety innovation since 1914, protecting first responders around the world. For more information, visit msafire.com. When you go in, we go in with you.
How can people get more involved with that? I mean, I think it almost sounds like we need more town hall meetings with the NFPA committee.
We do.
And like, hey, I'll MC them. I'm fine with that because I can be like, all right, what are you guys saying? And all right, what do you need in the fire service, right? Like, yeah, this is great, but that's not how it's working for us. How can we come together, right?
Well, the town hall meeting, focus groups, what do you want to call them? I mean, those things work really well. What does also works is if you focus on, say, a given set of topics. So, for example, I was telling you about helmets.
Yeah.
We specifically focused on helmets, and we got some really good. If we say, okay, we're going to talk about helmets and hoods and gloves, starts to spread out. And helmets obviously is so iconic within the fire service anyway. You got the modern versus the traditional helmet, and then you got the European style and all this other stuff. And it gets
well, you said a swear word there. Hold on. You said European style.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And you're right. There. I mean, you talk East Coast, it's like, what are you doing to us?
What is that? What is that thing on your head? Yeah.
So what is that? Yeah, we're not from Europe over here. So it's challenging, but that's how you get buy-in, right? And you got to get buy-in. If you don't get buy-in, so I write other standards, like I'll tell you, EMS standards are not quite as complicated as structural, but the PPE and EMS is, you got different kinds of face shields, garments, gloves,
glasses,
all this other stuff. What is it? Firefighter, they're going to wear examination gloves, base, maybe. And if, maybe if there's some, traumatic blood issue, maybe a face shield, probably not, maybe they'll take off their turnout clothing and put on an apron or something like that. But, there's, the
Tyvek suit in some of the cases.
They're not going to, so you don't get as much traction in an area like that. Structural firefighting, you do. And the reason you do is because even though there's all these, I'll call chronic risks, you get the stress from wearing the clothing, which we know relates to cardiac events, and long-term health disabilities. We've also got events that, the whole carcinogenic thing is also a big deal. It wasn't for a while. It is now. It's certainly for the contamination of clothing. But the immediate hazards, like physical hazards and, heat and flame exposure, those are real. Those are acute hazards. So there's a judgment that's going on in the mind of the firefighter. Says, do I need to do this, right? And they're saying, how likely am I? I did this 100 times and I've been okay. So, and I'll tell you little things like you have ear covers that are intended to come out of the helmets, right? And they cover your ears and they add to that thermal protection in your hood. I can't tell you how many firefighter fatality investigations or near misses that I've looked at where they're rolled up or taken off. Now, was that the contributing cause? Most times not. Most times the cause was the conditions at the fire scene simply exceeded the capabilities of the gear. Most times. But there are circumstances where brain injuries do occur. And you see those more in near misses than you do in a fatality, which is, I will tell you, is incredibly instructive. And that's the other thing that we try to do in the NFPA is we try to take learning from those events, where there's investigations by NIOSH and other groups or independent investigations by the department themselves to try to inform these decisions. But, to get the fire service engaged, they have to realize that their department is doing a needs assessment, selecting gear, picking that gear, and then they have to realize that wearing that gear is part of their own risk assessment, but they have to do it because the department's figured that out, what they're doing it for, but they also have to wear it correctly, and that doesn't always happen either. And, and sometimes there's customization, there's all kinds of things that go on.
Well, or we just, I don't need to wear my SCBA in this.
Yeah, right. Or I'm wearing a face pad. I mean, I go back to the days, this isn't too long ago, they're in New York City, cheaters. They have these little bite bars in the face piece, so that when the officer is around, they would look like they're wearing their face piece on their, on their heads of the SCBA, and then so they take it out, but they could put it on and make it look like they're wearing their face piece because they had a bite bar in the mask to be able to look like they're on their breathing mask. So it's crazy.
All the effort to just do that instead of just click it in.
Yeah. Well, there's the breathing resistance. There's all kinds of things. It's hot, it's cumbersome, affects their awareness. That's the other thing. So,
wow. I guess, and this is a great kind of segue into, you've done this research for 40 years, and you've been on numerous committees, and you've obviously done a lot of research on, line of duty deaths and near misses. I mean, what are 3 or 4 things that just stand out to you that you wish every firefighter understood about what you've been researching and learning over the years?
Well, if we talk strictly structural fires, the thing is, you have to remember that the gear has limitations. Number one, the gear has limitations. It will not protect you against everything. Rewrite standards as minimum standards.
Minimum.
Those minimum standards is not going to say, yes, you're going to survive a structural collapse and, in a trapped, heated fire environment, like in a basement or something like that. You have a certain amount of time. And obviously there's certain circumstances that there's no way the equipment would ever work for you. So understanding that should attenuate some of your risk taking. Now, obviously there's the adrenaline, the drive, the esprit de corps of the fire service in doing the magnificent job that it does to rescue people, save property, make people safe. But you don't want it yourself to become a fatality. And so you've got to know those limits, knowing the limits of turnout gear. So how does that happen? You know that through training, you know that through instruction. It also takes information from the manufacturer, because they won't say, well, you can use this gear for 10 minutes in this environment, so on and so forth. They'll never say that. And the standard doesn't say that either.
Okay.
So I'll give it a classic misinterpretation. The thermal protective performance test is essentially an evaluation of how much insulation the gear can provide you time-wise before you receive a second-degree burn. And there's a minimum number of 35. And that 35 is at a certain level of heat flux which is equivalent to a flash fire. And the time that we give is 17.5 seconds. Now we're not going to say, okay, okay, look at my stopwatch. I'm going to have 17.5 seconds in a flash fire. That, obviously we don't do that. And by the way, the fire environment is not staying constant. It's
No.
changing.
Yeah.
So it's a minimum level, but that level can easily and often does get exceeded.
Quicker than 17 seconds.
Quicker than you can expect. So obviously he's paying attention to. So we like to tell, part of that is, looking at keeping mindful of the clues that you have. So you start feeling heat in an environment, that's telling you something. That means that heat has started to penetrate your gear. If you're feeling it on your skin, I will tell you, if you don't do anything, burn injury is imminent.
Yeah.
It's imminent.
You got to be cooling that environment or getting the heck out of it.
That's right. You change your position, putting water on, doing something. But if you're not, burn injury is imminent, and things can degrade and hurt. That thermal ceiling can come down real quick, and you have to stay low and all this other things. So limitations is absolutely the number one thing. We do not write these standards for one gear to protect you against everything, because there's a series of trade-offs, and that's number two. Number two is trade-offs. Okay, so I can give you X amount of thermal protection, and that does not mean that I want you to go in further. I want you to go into the limit, of that gear. I don't even want you to go. I actually not even approach the limit of that gear, because that gives you a safety buffer, right, for not going in. But okay, if I want the best insulation gear, I just keep making it thicker and thicker and thicker. Well, guess what? Now I'm going to die of heat stress.
Yeah, because you can't let any of the heat out.
Yeah, right. And by the way, I'm wearing that gear, staging at the event, at the fire scene, running hose line, doing other operations, ventilation on the outside, all kinds of things where you're still in a semi-ambient environment. But all that time, I'm having my core temperature rise. I'm doing hard physical activity, and I have to have that gear not encumber me so much. The gear itself. Here's the other thing. All protection comes at a price. All protection comes at a price. So I'm giving up something. I'm protecting myself, but I can't move as well. I can't see as well. I can't hear as well. I can't do things as well as if I was.
My body can't breathe as well. Right. Yeah.
So number one trade-off, heat stress. But now, okay, I want chemical protection. I'm going to encounter bloodborne pathogens, hazardous liquids, or chemicals on the fire ground. So that's going to affect my breathability. You start building all these trade-offs. I need this gear to be electrical resistant. I need to have certain physical penetration, impact resistance on a helmet, so that obviously I'm putting weight on my head. I'm encumbering my head, building to move. Got an interface area that's complicated already with a face piece, a helmet, ear covers, hood, coat, all come together in one place, plus a radio up in there somewhere too. And I've got to be able to function well enough to be able to be nimble and make good decisions and be aware and keep myself protected and make the fire ground approach effective in the beginning. So it's really tough to do this. It is incredibly tough to do this. And you got to be, and that's why these standards have become complicated, is we are facing more and more trade-offs all the time.
Yeah. Well, right. And then technology comes into this too.
That's
right. As technology is becoming more advanced, now you're getting the radio embedded into, so the comms and embedded into the mask, and right. So
and you actually end up with more failure modes too, actually, for things to go wrong, right, as well. So and you got to anticipate what those failure modes are and say, okay, it's got to be reliable. So I'll take it. An SCBA gets approved by the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. They approve all respirators. Their rules are completely insufficient for the fire service. So what is it? NFPA writes their own standard, builds on those NIOSH rules, that approval, and says, okay, we're going to do a shake and bake test. We're going to do, vibration. We're going to do, a flash fire simulation with on a preheated SCBA, and it's got to continue to function. And then we learn later on, several years ago, back in the late 2000s, early 2010s, that the firefighters were going in deeper, and the most vulnerable part of that SCBA was the visor or
Mhm.
the lens of the
The
face.
lens of the
Right.
SCBA.
And then,
Yeah,
and
the mask.
essentially what happened, it would melt under high radiant heat conditions, you get compromised, catastrophic loss of air.
Yep.
And we had a number of firefighter unfortunate fatalities succumbing to all that instance. And so there was requirements built in. How do we build a better face piece? But what's the next vulnerable component after that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I saw an incident recently where the emergency breathing safety system, that's buddy breather hose for those who don't know that's the
Yeah.
technical term, became a potential avenue for a catastrophic air loss because it wasn't evaluated to the same extent as the other parts of the SCBA. And so you're constantly, and as firefighters want to go sometimes deeper and stay longer, but you can't, if you exceed the limitations of that gear, you have no margin of error, none.
Right.
So limitations and trade-offs. I mean, two biggest points here.
Yeah. And you and I were talking too. The other part of that is um, understand the limitations of yourself and
Yes,
educate yourself, right? Like
right.
this is part of that process to understand physically, mentally what you're capable of, and then what you're capable of in the gear, what your gear is capable of. I think that brings into a well-rounded kind of knowledge tree of things that we all need to focus on, right?
Right.
And and so it comes down to, I think one of the final questions is what do we, as a firefighter, what should I focus on when it comes to NFPA? Give me the bare bones, but it doesn't matter which one it is. We can talk about
Well,
PPE.
so,
We can talk.
so remember that the whole purpose of the NFPA standard is to provide a minimum standard, but the minimum for you may not be the minimum for everybody else. So it's important that, well, as an individual firefighter, you got to recognize that you usually don't have a choice on your gear. You're provided your gear by your department. They've made a choice. But you do want, if you have your own experience, you want to have input. Maybe you're not on the safety selection committee or something like that. But anything that you find out about your gear, you want to tell your department about that so they can pick that up in their investigation and review of candidate products and materials, that they can account for that. You got to realize that the gear has to be worn correctly, that even though you may have been able to do something without any issues for time and again, things can change in a heartbeat. And they do. And I've seen too many incidents where, hey, this is an ordinary fire, and they go in. I mean, it's a small place. It's 1,000 square foot room or something like that, and things just can go really horrible. But realize those limitations, and if there's things that you think you like, you got to communicate that. In this NFPA process is only successful really is if we're hearing the needs of the firefighters. Now, one of the things I'm thinking about long term is we may have been trying to have a one size fits all solution in the fire service for everything we do. And I don't think that works. We write a one minimum, and you can say, well, it's the minimum standard. You always build on it for, if you're in the Southwest East or something, like when it's hot and humid versus Alaska, maybe you have different issues for the comfort of the gear, for example. But I think there needs to be some more flexibility, and that's one of the things we're looking for. So we need that. And we have helmets again. California says, you know what? We don't need ear covers and we don't need face shields.
Yeah.
And
Well, they
yeah,
do more wildland too, so they need a
yeah,
helmet
right,
for
right,
wildland,
right,
right?
right. And they said, they said, and they went to their statistics. Cal Fire did at least, and they said they have hardly any burns. On ear, any face, head burns that would be attributable to those kinds of issues. Now, is that okay? Well, if they can have their gear configured, their tactics, everything is interrelated. It's not just the gear. The gear is not the sole solution. We look at, when we look at a hierarchy of protection, we always talk, this is the classic inverted triangle thing, the different colors. When you talk about administrative and, engineering out the solution, well, you don't have that luxury at the fire scene. And we always come down to this: PP is the last line of defense. But tactically, you do have ways that you can temper or lower your risk. And so knowing how that PPE limitations are and knowing exactly how PPE can fit into that, within the practices of the department and how they conduct emergency operations. I mean, that is paramount. It's not, it's training, it's the PPE, it's the awareness on scene, it's being anticipatory of those kinds of things that can go wrong, and knowing how to avoid them. And when all those come together, 99 out of 100 times, everyone goes home safely, no one gets hurt.
Yeah.
And we want that to be a whole lot more than that. We want it to be like 999,000 or whatever, the 0.001% type of thing. And we're not there yet, but we're trying to move in that direction.
Yeah. So understand your gear. And I think we can use technology. This is maybe where AI can come into this a little bit, right? Like
there is, absolutely. The technology, we used to think, okay, everyone's going to have all this instrumentation. We're going to have sensors for, too hot, get out, all this warning stuff. It's not quite there. I mean, the technology is pretty close, but the gear starts to get really complicated, and also gets maybe not quite as reliable, right? And then you say, are you building a false security now based on, okay, it's going to tell me when I'm in too far.
Yeah.
And it's going to tell me to get out. And maybe it didn't work that time. And that's horrible, right? That you don't want that to happen either. But it's behavior, it's product, it's technology. There's a lot of things that go into this. There has to be an interaction between manufacturers and end users of learning. Manufacturers can build gear. They don't know fires. They try to know fires. Users know fires. They try to know gear.
Yeah.
So building that bridge, right? That's real important, and understanding those limitations. I know manufacturers have programs to train, about capabilities, about the gear, learning. The departments need to proactively teach that as well. And some of that happens in different departments already. So it's nothing that's insurmountable. It's obviously time and resources and everything else, like everything the fire service faces. But the reality is, being informed, being aware, knowing things aren't perfect, and protecting yourself and your buddies is paramount for staying safe.
Yeah. Whether it's your gear or yourself physically and mentally, I think that the message is the same. Knowledge is power. And, the NFPA is set forth to help educate us and educate, vendors, obviously. And so the better we know that and what we're asking of the vendors, the better we know our gear, and then how we can apply that knowledge to our own tactics, our own mental capacity, our own physical capacity, right? That's how we all get better. And
it is. And it sounds like intuitive, right? I mean,
yeah,
course,
well,
right?
it does, but we got to do it too.
Yeah,
right?
I know. It's like, every fire is a unique fire. I'll tell you that. And firefighters know this. I mean, it looks like, this, room contents, right? Single story construction, in and out, but we still have fatalities and injuries that happen in those seemingly simple events.
Last question for you, my friend. What continues to motivate you? Is there a story? Is there something that sticks in your head that when you're reading in the NFPA, you're on page 200, or if you're in a 3-hour meeting, is there something that you kind of resort back to that says, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm meant to do?
Well, I've gotten a lot of satisfaction from knowing that, the work that I do, along with many others that participate in this process, has contributed to improved health and safety of firefighters. And that gives me a good feeling, particularly for individuals that put their lives at risk constantly. So that's obviously a huge motivator. But I like it when we solve something, and we do solve some things on occasion pretty effectively. We have a program now for cleaning verification, and I'll tell you, going back to that cleaning, I started when I was actually, before I even formed my own company back in the 80s. I was working the U.S. Fire Administration, FEMA, to get interest. They had a project on gear, soil, and contamination, and how to remove it, and so on and so forth. I tried to get interest in people to clean their gear. Another organization, Fiero, was doing the same work, and it was like, gosh, I can't get past this. I couldn't even get interest in developing the standard at that point. Fiero went out, fortunately, created the brand new standard. that are created their own work guidelines, and eventually NFPA picked that up, and it became a standard 2001 or wherever. But we saw a transition. So I can look back and say, wow, you know, what was being done 20 years ago is really changed.
Yeah.
You know, it gives me satisfaction, and so I could have written a paper, you know, published it in a journal or something like that. No, how am I going to implement this knowledge and practice so that it directly affects firefighters? If I put it in a standard, even if the department just accepts 50% of the standard, that's better than nothing. And so I've made that change. So being able to make change that you can observe. I mean, I could get metrics around it, but seeing that, you know, that dirty clothing is really the exception now, rather than the rule as it used to be 25 years ago, is something I feel very proud of. And I certainly think that I'm glad that the fire service, we were able to get the right message out, create the standards, make them practical where we can, and see that change occur.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all your efforts. And I think to our listeners, I challenge you, when you're thinking of not wearing that PPE properly, you're thinking of cutting a corner, please remember Jeff and his 40 years of service and the painstaking meetings that he's had to endure so we can stay safe. So it's on us.
Nowhere near as tough as fire service has in their day-to-day job. So you guys are really the true heroes, and I appreciate it. It's just why we do what we do. So
yeah, well, we thank your efforts, and thank you all for listening. By the way, I hope this hits home, resonates why the NFPA can be a little lengthy, what goes into it, and that you understand we have great people like Jeff behind the scenes that are pushing for us to be healthier, safe. Again, the challenge, we got to use it. We got to get a little bit better with it. If you have questions for us on the show, please email us, bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. Want to say thank you to MSA, who is sponsoring our standard series. This is part of that. You can go to firerescue1.com/the standard series to get this, along with the webinar and some of the great articles that Jeff has written here on Fire Rescue One. He's got some great articles on NFPA 1970, 1950, along with some things on navigating NFPA 1851 and 1852. This is where my numbers stuff really, math is hard.
Yeah.
Math is hard.
Numbers, right. So no, it's and look for those articles are probably going to help you understand bits and pieces of things rather than read a standard. We don't expect you to read the standard. We want you to comply with the standard, but we certainly want you to have some understanding of it. So that's important.
Yep. Understand it, understand why it's important, understand it's your gear and its limitations, understand your own limitations, but constantly just try to get out there, learn something, do something, and share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.